Go ahead and leave. You won't survive a week without me." That line, flung across the kitchen like a knife, just hung there. Monica didn't scream it. She didn't cry. She said it with a smirk, with wine on her breath, with that smug tilt of her head she'd perfected over the years. Equal parts arrogance and boredom. The same look she used when she told her sister that Daniel used to be charming before he got so beige. Daniel stood on the other side of the island, still in his polo and khakis from the hardware store trip he never finished. He'd gone to pick up caulk and some replacement bulbs for the back patio lights she'd mentioned were out. And then she made that comment, offhand, in the living room. "You treat retirement like it's a job. You know nobody's grading you anymore, right?" He hadn't answered. He just finished putting the bulbs into the box like he was organizing evidence. Now, here in the kitchen, his kitchen, in the house he'd built with his own money, brick by brick, upgrade by upgrade, she was daring him to go, laughing like she was calling his bluff. "You think I don't see how you've been moping around since your precious business sold? Poor Dan, nothing to do but organize screws and pretend he's still useful." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the keys, one for the front door, one for the truck, one for the safe. He placed them on the counter like a man laying down his weapons. Monica blinked. "Wait, seriously?" Still no answer. No eye roll. No sarcastic comeback. He just looked at her for a long second, like he was seeing a painting that once meant something to him, now cracked and faded from the years. And then he turned and walked out. No suitcase. No slam. "No, you'll regret this." He left the caulk on the table. The patio lights still needed fixing. She stood there for a moment, frozen, like she expected him to turn around and say something clever. But the door stayed shut. The silence stretched. She poured herself another glass of wine and muttered, "Drama queen." What she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed in her wildest, wine-sogged fantasies, was that Daniel hadn't just walked out to cool off. He wasn't at the holiday and Googling couples therapy or sleeping in his truck like some sad country song. He was already gone. Not just physically, strategically. The quiet man she married, the one who handled taxes and paperwork because he actually enjoys that stuff, had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment. Quietly, carefully, invisibly. While Monica was scrolling through real estate listings for condos in Costa Rica and calling her dad to ask for another short-term loan for just a bit of breathing room, Daniel had been adjusting names on accounts, consolidating assets, refiling old paperwork from when he helped bail out her father's real estate firm during that quiet little downer 2 years ago. She called him paranoid for keeping paper copies, obsessive for tracking every damn cent like some old miser. He wasn't obsessed. He was meticulous. And now, the machine was already humming. His truck, a battered but well-maintained Silverado, wasn't headed to a motel. It was already parked behind a bland little bungalow on the edge of town, leased under the name of a trust. Inside, a coffee pot bubbled, and his old Toshiba laptop blinked patiently from the table. A folder sat next to it, labeled Trigger Assets. And at the very bottom, under a manila envelope sealed months ago, a thin, printed copy of the asset guarantee clause Monica never read, because Daniel had already handled that stuff. He'd known she would mock him. Eventually. He'd known she'd push too far. And he'd known that when it happened, when she made her final mistake, he wouldn't need to shout, or cry, or beg. He would just leave. Because boring men don't explode. They evaporate. And when they do it right, they take the oxygen with them. The Airbnb was nothing special. Clean, quiet, and beige in a way Monica would have called depressing. Daniel found it comforting. No chatter. No echo of her heels on the floor. Just the low hum of the fridge and the occasional rustle of wind outside. He locked the door, poured himself a glass of water, and sat down at the small kitchen table like a man arriving at his office for a regular day of work. It was work. It had been for months. The laptop booted with a soft click. A familiar screen blinked to life. Spreadsheet tabs, secure logins, encrypted vaults. He didn't rush. Didn't need to. This was the part he'd rehearsed. The detachment phase. The emotional fuse had burned out long ago, long before Monica's final dare. That was just the closing bell. The folder labeled Trigger Instruments wasn't just digital. It had physical backups, locked in a separate P.O. box 2 counties over. Daniel had tested access last month. Everything functioned as expected. He opened the bank portal first. 3 accounts, all tied to one property, their house. Technically still jointly owned, but Daniel had maneuvered around that months ago using a strategic leverage clause buried inside a silent co-guarantee Monica's father had signed during his last liquidity crunch. She never asked why Daniel insisted on refinancing the house in his name. "You and these forms," she'd scoffed. "I trust you. Just tell me where to sign." So she did. And he did. Her father, Richard Costello, had sat at Daniel's grill 2 summers ago, bourbon in hand, practically begging for help after a deal in Sarasota collapsed. Daniel hadn't blinked. He'd pulled strings, sold off an old asset, and structured a line of credit through an obscure lender who specialized in asset-backed flexibility. But not before adding one important clause. The house, his house, was used as a cross-collateral instrument, tagged to Richard's loan package, with Daniel as the override guarantor. Quiet, invisible, but potent. And today? Today was the trigger date. One click. Revoke primary guarantor status. Confirmation required. Daniel checked the date on the calendar. September 2nd. Right on schedule. He entered the 2-factor code. It pinged a burner phone he bought 6 months ago. Not that he needed it. The code was already written in his notebook, beneath a sticky note that read, "For peace of mind." The final prompt appeared. "Warning, revoking guarantor status will initiate reassessment of secured collateral on loan ID hashtag 32431RC. Continue?" He clicked yes. Another prompt. "This action will remove guarantor Daniel L. Jacobs from primary status and transfer liability responsibility to backup instrument. Residential property, Oakview Lane, per agreement addendum 4C. Yes, it was done. Just like that, the house was now exposed. No longer protected by Daniel's financial profile. It would be reclassified within the week, pending review by the lending institution. And Monica? She had no idea what a callable clause even was. To her, the house was just paid off. Just a place to post wine glass pics from. He opened the second folder, insurance revocation forms. Months ago, he had bundled the house's protection under a business rider tied to his consulting firm. That policy? Canceled last week. The state requirement would default to Monica's name. If she even noticed the renewal notice buried in the mail. If she didn't, that was on her. Next tab, the LLC. Back in March, Daniel had quietly created a shell entity called Midsummer Vessel Holdings, with himself listed as an anonymous executive trustee. Its purpose? Holding the remaining funds from the asset sale. Untouchable. Non-marital. Post-nuptial asset designation. He'd filed everything with a smirk, imagining Monica calling it weird prepper nonsense if she'd found the paperwork. She didn't. She was too busy scrolling through Instagram, captioning beach shots with manifesting luxury, while the walls around her were, financially speaking, already being hollowed out. He moved to the last step. The file labeled MC_revocation.pdf. Monica Costello Jacobs. Spousal cosigner. Revocation of financial authority. Formally stripped of access to all joint holdings as of 10:47 p.m. tonight. He opened the document. Read the last line. This action is irrevocable unless rescinded by the primary party with unanimous consent of the asset holding board. Daniel smiled faintly. He was the board. He signed the digital form, dated it, uploaded it. Then he leaned back, closed the laptop, and sipped his now lukewarm water. No fireworks. No dramatic music. Just soft silence. The kind of silence men like him work for decades to afford. Monica had dared him to leave. She never asked what he'd take with him. The answer? Everything she didn't know he was holding. Monica woke up at 7:32 a.m. to the annoying buzz of her Apple Watch reminding her to hydrate. She swatted at it, rolled over, and blinked at the empty pillow beside her. Cool to the touch. She stretched lazily, pulled the covers tighter, and smiled to herself. She assumed he was probably sulking in the garage again, pretending to reorganize tools no one had touched since Obama's second term. Maybe he went on one of his walks around the lake. That's what boring men do, right? They stew quietly and come back when they're ready to apologize for being too sensitive. It wasn't until 9:13 a.m. that she checked her phone. No text. No missed calls. Odd, considering Daniel usually sent a good morning message or some dry note about the sprinklers acting up. He had this pathetic little ritual of checking the irrigation schedule every morning like it was a nuclear launch code. She rolled her eyes and opened his contact, thumb hovering over the call button. Instead, she went into the kitchen, popped a bagel into the toaster oven, and turned on the news. Something about a strike, something about interest rates, something about a billionaire with a rocket fetish. Whatever. She ate in silence. It felt weird. By 11:02, she was annoyed. She called him. Straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," she said, a little sing-song in her voice, the way she always sounded when she thought he was being dramatic. "You win, okay? Come back. The house feels like a tomb. She didn't say, I miss you. She didn't mean it. She expected him to call back, to shuffle in sheepishly by 2 p.m. with a grocery bag and a passive-aggressive comment about her leaving dishes in the sink. By noon, she called again. Still voicemail. Now it was beginning to itch. She went to his office in the den. The door was ajar. Desk clear. Laptop gone. The charger unplugged. The bottom drawer, the one he always told her not to mess with because of sensitive files, was empty. She opened the closet. His winter coat was still there, but his old army duffel bag? Gone. She called his work line out of habit. We're sorry, the number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service. She laughed out loud. Really? Dramatic much? She tossed her phone onto the couch and muttered, he'll be back. By 3:45 p.m., she had called him 4 more times. Left 2 voicemails. Texted him something halfway between flirtation and accusation. So you're really doing this, huh? Running away? Still nothing. At 5:12 p.m., she made a martini, extra dirty, and poured half of it into her mouth before pacing toward the bedroom. She threw open his side of the closet. Shirt still hanging. Shoes still lined up. But the small wooden box where he kept old IDs, cash, and what he called his just-in-case kit? Gone. She sat down. Looked at the wall. This wasn't like him. Daniel didn't do chaos. He didn't do silence. At 6:03 p.m., she finally caved and texted her father. Have you heard from Daniel? No reply. At 6:17 p.m., she called. No answer. At 6:24 p.m., he called her back. His voice was clipped. Dry. Like he was talking to a tenant who hadn't paid rent. Call me. Now. That was it. No hello. No concern. No sweetheart. Just 3 words. She blinked at the screen. Reread it 5 times. Her stomach began to twist. Not with guilt. Monica didn't believe in guilt, but with something darker. Something unfamiliar. Something off-script. She called him. He answered immediately. Dad, what's going on? What the hell did you say to Daniel? She froze. What? You heard me. What did you say to him last night? She hesitated, suddenly unsure of her tone. I told him to leave. It wasn't. He's always taking things so. Jesus, Monica, her father exhaled. I just got off the phone with Regents. The bank. Your husband's name has been pulled from the override agreement. Do you understand what that means? I know. What does that? The house. The accounts. My firm. Daniel wasn't just a co-signer, Monica. He was the guarantor. He was the stabilizer. What are you talking about? Her voice pitched up, high and small. The bank said everything is being reassessed. All instruments tied to him are under immediate review. The covenant waivers are void. Monica, the cross-collateral clause, is live. She stared at her own reflection in the black TV screen across the room, wine glass in hand. You need to fix this, her father said. I didn't know he could do that. There was a pause. Then her father said, flatly, he was always quiet. Monica, that didn't mean he was weak. You pushed a man who never made noise into silence. And now silence is all you're going to get. The line went dead. And for the first time that day, Monica realized she wasn't playing house anymore. She was sitting in the wreckage of one. The second call from her father came at 7:31 p.m. This time, no pleasantries, no lectures, no breathing space. Monica, are you sitting down? She rolled her eyes, cradling the phone between her shoulder and cheek while stirring her second martini with the olive stick. Jesus, Dad, calm down. What did Daniel ghost you to? Must be some male menopause thing. There was a pause. A dangerous one. Listen carefully. Daniel used the house, your house, as cross-collateral. For my entire commercial portfolio. Do you even know what that means? Monica's fingers tightened around the glass. What? No. I thought he. What do you mean use the house? It's paid off. I just updated the backsplash last month. This is... Monica. Her father's voice dropped to a growl. Without Daniel's override, the bank has the right to reclassify the note. That means every single line of credit tied to that collateral is now being reviewed as unsecured. Do you know what that does to our ratios? No, she said flatly. I don't speak bank panic. I'm not one of your analysts. You're about to become one, he snapped. Because Regions just froze 3 accounts. 3. I got the notice 15 minutes ago. They cited guarantor status alteration without substitution. Daniel revoked his override clause. He's not just gone. Monica, he's untethered himself. And now I'm exposed. She opened her mouth, but said nothing. The olive slipped off the toothpick and sank to the bottom of her glass. I told you to respect him, her father hissed. I told you to stop treating him like a damn side character in your life. But you just had to keep poking him, didn't you? And now you've set fire to the only man who was holding the umbrella over this entire damn family. I didn't know he was tied to your firm. Oh, for God's sake, he bellowed. He was the silent backstop. The one who got us through the Sarasota shortfall. Who kept us in compliance during COVID when everyone else was folding. You think I asked you to marry him just because he brought his own tools and liked grilling on Sundays? Monica blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying that your husband, ex-husband, apparently, was the keystone holding up a very expensive arch. And you just kicked it out because you thought you were being clever. There was a pause. Her chest was tight. I didn't think he'd actually leave. Her father exhaled hard through his nose. You didn't think because you've never had to. Daniel did the thinking. Daniel did the math. Daniel protected you. She sat down on the edge of the couch, still holding the phone, glass forgotten on the carpet. Her voice was quieter now. So what happens now? What happens, her father said, his voice now low and shaking, is that the bank's going to reassess every loan we have. I already got 2 demand letters for asset exposure. If they reclassify the note, they can demand immediate liquidity. And Monica, there is no liquidity. Not without Daniel. She was sweating now, but the room wasn't hot. So call them, she said quickly. Explain that it's a misunderstanding. That he's just throwing a fit. They already pulled up the documents. Monica, he filed them 2 weeks ago. This was planned. He had contingency declarations logged with the registrar's office. There's a paper trail, dated, notarized, logged. He's not throwing a fit. He's executing a decision. She stood now, panic flickering into her chest like static. But why wouldn't he tell me? Because you told him he was nothing. Because you said he couldn't survive without you. And he decided to prove that you were wrong in the only way that mattered, financially, structurally, irrevocably. Her legs were moving before she realized it. Toward the den, toward the drawer she hadn't opened in years, where he kept files, folders, contracts. Gone. Of course they were. She stumbled back into the living room. What do I do? She whispered. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, you pray that man isn't as ruthless as you thought he was. Because if he is, we're not just looking at a reassessment. We're looking at foreclosure, audit, reputation loss. But it was just a comment, she muttered, more to herself than him. It was just one stupid argument. No, her father interrupted. It wasn't. It was a trigger, and you gave him the reason he needed to pull it. The line went dead again. Monica sat there in the too quiet living room, her phone slipping from her hand, her mind racing not with grief or anger, but raw, growing dread. She had poked a man who never raised his voice. And now his silence was dismantling everything around her, one clause at a time. The call came just past 9 the next morning, while Monica was still in her robe, staring at the edge of her bathroom sink like it had personally offended her. She hadn't slept. She'd spent most of the night pacing between her closet and the front door, waiting for Daniel to show up. Or at least call. Explain. Apologize. Nothing. The mirror had offered her a version of herself she didn't quite recognize. Smeared mascara, sallow skin, mouth slightly agape like she couldn't decide whether to scream or cry. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Graham Peters, work. She picked up, trying to push some fake cheer into her voice. Graham. Hey, good morning. What the hell, Monica? She jerked back from the phone, heart thudding. I'm sorry, what? Our bridge loan. Just got pulled. Pulled. Do you have any idea what that does to our cash flow? Her brain was still in fog, but the name registered. The bridge loan. The one the firm secured 3 months ago to smooth over that shaky acquisition. She blinked. I don't understand. Why are you calling me about that? You don't understand? Graham sounded like he was pacing. We're breaking things. You don't understand? Monica, I personally vouch for you. I put my name on the stability profile we submitted to Bayfield. You were our anchor hire, remember? They extended that line because I guaranteed you had no external volatility. And guess what showed up in the goddamn review audit this morning? She gripped the counter. Graham, what are you talking about? Why does that have anything to do with? Daniel Jacobs, he roared. Your husband. The man who quietly co-signed the secondary guarantee behind our capital reserve clause. Don't play dumb with me, Monica. You used him. She flinched. What do you mean I used him? Oh, come on. Graham barked. You brought him to that dinner with Bayfield's partners. You encouraged them to ask about his credentials. And he impressed the hell out of them, remember? You told me to let him help shape the risk mitigation strategy. She remembered the dinner. Sort of. Wine had flowed. Graham had bragged about their new momentum. She'd nudged Daniel to speak when the conversation turned to market resilience. He'd made some dry joke about asset reallocation, and the old money guys had loved him. She thought she was scoring points. That was months ago. I didn't know he actually, she started. Graham cut her off. He co-signed the damn security guarantee. Quietly, like everything else he did. And now Bayfield ran a secondary check because of the Costello firm news. Oh yeah, your dad is making headlines. And guess what? Daniel's entire profile is scrubbed. Gone. Assets sealed. Trust shielded. Debt reassigned. They revoked the loan. Monica. Effective immediately. Her mouth opened and closed. Graham, I swear I didn't. They already froze the queue for disbursement. And without that, we miss payroll by the 18th. You want to explain to 72 employees why their paychecks bounce? She backed into the wall. This isn't my fault. You think Bayfield cares about that? He snapped. You think reputational risk is about blame? You were supposed to be our grown-up in the room. The stable exec. Married to the man with enough quiet money to keep the floor from collapsing. Silence. Where is he? Graham demanded. I don't know. You don't know? I told him to leave, she whispered. Graham laughed. A dry, stunned laugh with no humor. Well, congrats, he said. He did. And he took the goddamn scaffolding with him. Click. The call ended. Monica stood there, breath ragged, heart trying to claw its way out of her chest. Her head buzzed with fragments. Stability profile. Co-signature. Trust-shielded assets. Missed payroll. She walked into the living room like a sleepwalker and sank onto the couch. The TV was still on, muted, some daytime show with smiling people baking. She suddenly hated them. The floor felt less like ground and more like ice. Thin, cracking, groaning under weight she hadn't realized was there. It wasn't just her father. It wasn't just her marriage. Daniel had been everywhere, quietly bolstering every corner of her life. Her home, her job, her status. And now that he'd retracted, everything was caving in. She looked at the front door again. Still closed. Still no keys jingling. Her phone buzzed again. A text. From a coworker. Hey, are you okay? HR is looking for you. Her blood turned cold. No emojis. No warmth. Just the kind of message people send when they're trying to get out of the blast radius. She looked down at her hands and realized, maybe for the first time, she didn't have anything to hold on to. Daniel had taken nothing when he left. Except, somehow, the floor. By 11:17 a.m., Monica was driving 43 in a 30 zone, hands locked at 10 and 2 like a rookie. She hadn't brushed her hair. Hadn't eaten. Her phone had already died once from all the panic checking. Texts from her father. 3 missed calls from Graham. 2 co-workers suddenly checking in. And Daniel? Still nothing. The glass bank building loomed into view like a courthouse. It had always looked sleek, modern, expensive, in that quiet, predatory way. She parked like she was late to a meeting, didn't bother fixing her shirt, and power-walked through the doors with the kind of urgency reserved for people trying to undo disasters they didn't see coming. At the teller desk, she dropped her ID on the marble surface and whispered, I need to speak to someone in private. Urgently. The woman behind the counter, mid-30s with impeccable eyeliner and a professionally cautious smile, looked at the screen, then at Monica. Name. Monica Costello Jacobs. A flicker. That subtle change in facial tension when a stranger recognizes your name. Not because you're famous, but because you're flagged. One moment. 5 minutes later, a man in a tailored gray suit escorted her into a glass-walled office and gently closed the door. Ms. Costello Jacobs, I'm Alan Mercer. Relationship Management. How can I help today? She sat too quickly, nearly missing the chair. My husband, she said. Daniel Jacobs. I need to see our accounts. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mercer opened a sleek laptop, typed a few things, then paused. Would you like me to go over all associated accounts, or just the joint ones? All of it. Everything. He nodded, clicked a few more times. Then another pause. Longer. Ms. Jacobs, I'm seeing here that several accounts tied to Mr. Jacobs were transferred out of our institution entirely as of last week. The remaining accounts were closed this morning. What? She said, voice cracking for the first time. Additionally, there was a revocation notice filed against the joint mortgage last night at 11:12 p.m. She shook her head. No, that can't. What does that even mean? It means the mortgage is no longer shielded by Mr. Jacobs' guarantor override. The property has now been reclassified as a callable instrument, which, under the terms of the original loan agreement from 2020, allows the lending entity to request full repayment upon significant profile change or elevated exposure risk. She blinked, the words washing over her like foreign language. You're saying the house is what? In jeopardy. He hesitated. It's currently under lien review. We've received a conditional flag for reassessment. That includes its use as cross-collateral, which was detailed in the addendum to your husband's commercial instruments. No, no, she said, shaking her head like a child refusing bad news. The house is paid off. We finished payments last year. There's no mortgage. There's no traditional mortgage, Mercer corrected gently. But the property was leveraged as a debt instrument. A silent one, filed through a separate entity. It was protected by your husband's assets. Until he withdrew them. She stood up. There has to be a mistake. I didn't authorize this. I didn't even know. He handed her a printout. It was a scanned document. Daniel's signature. Clear. Legal. Dated. And above it, revocation of spousal guarantee. Effective immediately. The rest of the paper might as well have been blank. She sank back down. Mercer cleared his throat softly. Do you have access to Mr. Jacobs' new financial advisors or representatives? If this was a misunderstanding. It's not, she whispered. He paused again. Well, he said slowly, I recommend contacting your attorney. There may be ways to renegotiate if the property is transferred into a neutral holding entity. She didn't answer. Her phone vibrated on the table. New email. From notifications@regions.com. Subject. Lien evaluation, residential asset, Oakview Lane. She opened it with shaking fingers. As part of ongoing financial restructuring due to guarantor change, the residential property located at 431 Oakview Lane is now under conditional lien review, pending asset stability assessment. At the bottom of the message, a note in red. This action is automated and irreversible. She stared at it. The email. The paper in her hand. The man across from her. The glass office. The world outside moving on without her. Daniel had timed it all. The transfer. The revocation. The notices. Even the goddamn email. She stood up without saying anything and walked out, her heels echoing across the marble floor. Past the front desk. Past the smiling security guard who nodded at her like nothing had happened. In the parking lot, she leaned against her car and let out a slow, bitter laugh. The kind that turns into a sob halfway through and then stops, like it's not worth the energy. She pulled out her phone, tapped Daniel's name again. Call failed. She didn't leave a message. What could she even say? That she mocked a man who'd been holding the walls up without her ever noticing? That she laughed in the house he was using to shield her from the storm? That now, thanks to a few signatures and an unshakable silence, she was no longer the woman who had a life. She was the woman standing outside it, watching the windows go dark. The steakhouse wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. Daniel had chosen it carefully, tucked between a shuttered antique shop and a dentist's office in a strip mall that hadn't been remodeled since the early 90s. But the food was consistent, the lighting dim, and, most importantly, the staff knew how to mind their business. He sat at the corner booth, the leather creaking slightly under his weight, sipping an old-fashioned with a single cube of ice melting slowly in the glass. Across from him, his sister Karen was laughing softly at a story her husband Brian was telling. Something about the time Daniel had mistakenly installed a ceiling fan backward and blamed rotational turbulence. It was a lie, of course, but Daniel didn't correct him. He didn't need to. The story wasn't for accuracy. It was for warmth. The fourth seat was filled by Martin Lee, an old friend from the contracting days. Vietnam vet. Smart eyes. A quiet man, even more than Daniel, if that were possible. He'd seen the worst in people and never forgot it. When Daniel called him 3 weeks ago and asked if he still had that spare cabin up in Fox Hollow, Martin said, "You still drink scotch?" Daniel said yes. The cabin was his. Their steaks arrived. Medium rare all around. Brian started cutting his before the plate hit the table. Karen raised her glass. To new starts. Daniel nodded. No smile, but his eyes softened. He raised his glass, clinked it with hers, and took a slow sip. His phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it. Buzzed again. And again. Karen glanced at the screen, which lit up briefly. Monica, mobile. It buzzed again. Richard C. mobile. Then Graham Peters, work. Then back to Monica. I take it she figured it out, Karen said quietly, slicing her steak with surgical precision. Daniel didn't respond right away. He looked down at his plate like it was a chessboard he'd already won. She's not calling to apologize, he said finally. She's calling because her world's shrinking, and she thinks I'm the emergency exit. Brian leaned back in his seat, chewing, then said, "You're not picking up?" Daniel didn't even look at the phone. "No," he said simply. The time to speak was before she weaponized condescension. The phone buzzed again. Same names. Same loop. He reached out, tapped the power button, and silenced it. The device went dark, face down on the table. There was a long pause. Martin finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You sure you're all right, Dan?" Daniel leaned back, glass in hand. He didn't look like a man who had just torched 3 people's financial lives, a corporate bridge loan, and a real estate legacy. He looked like a man who had finally taken off a too-tight shirt he'd worn for 30 years. "I feel like I just stepped out of a soundproof box," he said. "Like I forgot what it felt like to not be edited." Karen watched him for a long second. "You were always too quiet for her. That wasn't your weakness. That was your strength." He nodded once. "She said I wouldn't last a week without her," he murmured, almost to himself. Another long silence. Then he lifted his glass again, this time higher. "To silence," he said clearly. "The only answer some people ever deserve." They clinked glasses. No dramatic music. No gloating. No long rants about betrayal. Just cutlery against porcelain, the hum of conversation from nearby booths, and the occasional sizzle from the kitchen. Daniel ate slowly, deliberately, savoring the piece like it was the main course. He didn't talk much. Never did. But he was listening. Really listening, for the first time in years. And the absence of Monica's voice? That was the cleanest sound he'd ever heard. The email came while she was sitting in the HR holding room, her blazer clinging to her back with nervous sweat, her jaw clenched so tightly her molars ached. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed just enough to keep her on edge. She stared at the blank walls, the frosted glass door, the untouched bottle of complimentary water on the table. She hadn't been in this room before. It was where they brought people who weren't quite fired, but weren't quite welcome anymore, either. The last 48 hours had been a blur of fallout. Her father's voice had turned from anger to dread to silence. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was whispering into lawyers' ears. Compliance flags had been raised after the bank pulled Daniel's guarantor override. Suddenly, the firm's liquidity narrative was under scrutiny by regional regulators. There were whispers about asset misclassification, exposure violations. Words like fraud by omission floated in hallways. Graham, her boss, hadn't spoken to her since that explosive call. But she'd seen the staff Slack messages, people panicking about missed paychecks, rumors spreading that Bayfield was pulling other lines. Morale, already brittle, had snapped. 2 engineers walked out mid-sprint. HR reps started rescheduling wellness reviews with senior staff. And Monica? Monica had gone from strategic director of operations to risk factor. It didn't come as a firing. No, that would have been too loud. It came as a soft tap on the shoulder from the HR coordinator that morning, asking if she had 10 minutes for a quick sync. No explanation. Just vague nods and tight smiles from the team as she gathered her things. By the time she was brought upstairs and asked to wait in this room, her badge had already been deactivated. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look right away. She'd been fielding nonstop noise. Calls from her father's lawyers, voicemails from her now former financial advisor, a pathetic stream of texts from people who once begged her for lunches now saying things like, "Hope everything's okay." It buzzed again. She sighed, picked it up, and checked the screen. It was a forwarded email. No sender name. No message. Just a subject line. Accountability at last. Her stomach clenched. She opened it. Inside was a screenshot of an internal memo, leaked, judging by the strictly confidential watermark stamped diagonally across the page. It was from Bayfield Capital's internal risk audit team. A few sentences jumped out in bold. Following the unanticipated revocation of the co-guarantee on instrument number 781 CCX, our exposure model has been materially impacted. The inclusion of non-verified guarantor entities and reliance on verbal reputational endorsements is now considered a breach of due diligence protocol. And then, her name. This includes the verified use of Monica Costello-Jacobs as a bridge profile asset without disclosing the nature of the personal relationship between the signatories. She felt the blood leave her face. They were painting her as the liability, the one who let Daniel's name get involved, without proper disclosure. Her proximity to the guarantor had become a risk factor in itself. She scrolled to the bottom of the email. There, in plain font. Corrective actions recommended. Removal of departmental authority pending review. So it was official. The HR meeting wasn't a check-in. It was to offload her. Outside the office door, she heard muffled voices. 2 women, maybe more. One said her name. Then laughter. Quiet, disbelieving laughter. She used to command that kind of whisper. But it was different now. The tone had shifted. Not admiration. Not envy. Dismissal. She looked back at her phone. The forwarded email had no header. No visible sender. But she knew who it was from. Daniel didn't need to sign it. He never said more than necessary. The message was clear. The woman who once rolled her eyes when he checked sprinklers and paid bills early was now sitting in a corporate purgatory, stripped of power, reputation crumbling like drywall behind cheap paint. Everything was unraveling. And Daniel? He hadn't raised his voice. He'd just quietly turned off the lights. One circuit at a time. The package was small. No return address. Brown craft paper, sealed with an ordinary strip of clear tape. It was waiting on her desk when she returned from the HR transition meeting. The kind where no one says fired, but everyone avoids eye contact and hands you a manila folder with your benefits and a half-hearted best of luck. Her desk had already been half emptied. Someone, maybe facilities, maybe HR, had packed her belongings into a generic cardboard box. Her framed quote about leadership was tilted sideways, like even it had given up on her. The office plants were gone. Just the nameplate sat there, Monica C. Jacobs, Strategic Operations Director. It looked like a gravestone. She stared at the package. For a second, she wondered if it was from her father. Maybe one of his lawyers. Some half-hearted gesture to show they were still unified, still family. Whatever that even meant now. She peeled the tape back with shaky fingers and found a single object inside. A USB drive. No label. Just a black plastic rectangle tucked in a folded note that read, in plain typed font, "You should see what silence looks like." No signature. No sender. But she didn't need one. Her heart ticked faster. She stood, locked her office door, pulled the blinds shut, and sat back down. Inserted the drive into her laptop. One video file. No name. Just a timestamp. She clicked it. The feed opened with a familiar grainy frame. Their front hallway. Her hallway. The angle she used to complain about. Daniel had insisted on installing the security cameras himself instead of just hiring someone like normal people. She watched as her own figure walked into frame. Wine glass in hand. Loose blouse, tight mouth. Smirking. She turned toward someone off-screen. Daniel. Her voice, clearer than she remembered, echoed in the quiet room. "Go ahead and leave. You won't survive a week without me." The tone dripped with scorn. Not anger. Not hurt. Just pure dismissal. On-screen, Monica waved a hand dramatically. "You're nothing without me, Daniel. You just exist. You don't live." Then, silence. Daniel entered the frame. Still. Calm. Not slouched. Not broken. Just watching her. Like someone reading a book they've already finished. Then he reached into his pocket, took out his keys, placed them gently on the counter, and walked out of frame. No words. No reaction. Just the click of the door closing softly behind him. She stared at the screen, transfixed. Her own face frozen in mid-smirk. The cruel final image of someone who thought they were in control. Then, the footage faded to black. A new frame appeared. It was a scan. A document. Her eyes narrowed. The top line read, "Loan Agreement Modification, Addendum 4C. Below it, two signatures. Daniel L. Jacobs. And beneath his, a banker's countersignature. Date signed, 2 weeks before that night. There, in fine print, the clause lit up like a burn. In the event of revocation of marital cohabitation or verified dissolution trigger, collateral reassignment shall proceed at sole discretion of guarantor." She blinked. He had already signed it. Before the fight. Before the dare. Before the mockery. He hadn't reacted to her words that night because they didn't matter anymore. She wasn't the cause of his exit. She was the final confirmation. The file ended there. No music. No fade out. Just a frozen image of her face. Mouth still half open from delivering the line that would echo in her head for years. "Go ahead and leave. You're nothing without me." And then silence. Real, absolute silence. Not just from the room. From the inbox, now dry. From the phone, which no longer lit up. From the people at work, who now barely made eye contact as they walked past her desk. From her father, who hadn't spoken in 2 days. Not since regulators started asking for documents she couldn't access. From Daniel. Especially from Daniel. She sat motionless, staring at the dark screen. Not crying. Not yelling. Just understanding. That silence wasn't the absence of noise. It was a verdict. And she had delivered the closing argument against herself. The gravel cracked beneath her heels as she stepped out of her father's car, still wearing the same blazer from 2 days ago, wrinkled now, with coffee stains on the cuff. Her hair was tied back in the kind of lazy, last-ditch bun you wear when you've stopped pretending to care. The sun was too bright for her throbbing head, and the weight of everything, job gone, accounts frozen, name tainted, pressed into her skull like a vice. She was back at her childhood home. Not by choice. Her father had offered, reluctantly, sternly, after realizing she had nowhere else to go. Her access to the Oak View property had been formally restricted that morning, following the lien confirmation. The gate code had been changed. Her name removed from the HOA registry. Like she never lived there. It was surreal and humiliating. The front lawn was dry, the sprinkler timer probably dead. The porch light was still on, even though it was morning. A courier stood by the front door, clipboard in hand, glancing at his watch. Monica Costello-Jacobs? Her name sounded foreign now, like a misprint. She nodded. He handed her a pen. Signature, please. She signed without asking. Her hand trembled slightly. The man handed her a large white envelope, nodded curtly, and walked back to the van, which pulled off before she even had the flap open. She ripped it clean and unfolded the papers inside. Several pages. Bold lettering. Legal format. Her eyes caught the header line. Notice of foreclosure, intent to seize asset, for 31, Oak View Lane. She stopped breathing. The envelope slipped from her hands, pages scattering like brittle leaves across the driveway. Her knees buckled slightly, hand gripping the porch railing to stay upright. Her vision narrowed, tunnel-like, hot, jagged. She bent down and snatched the first page from the concrete, fingers scraping against the grit. Final warning pursuant to Clause 4C, collateral reassignment complete. No protective guarantor remains in force. Liquidation process to begin within 30 days. She felt her chest cave in. A black hole right behind the sternum. She didn't cry. There was nothing left in the tank for that. Her body had already spent all its emotional currency on the last 4 days. She just stood there, breathing like someone had kicked her ribs in. Then she saw him, down the street, parked under the shadow of an oak tree. The gray Silverado. Clean. Still dented on the passenger side, like always. Hood warm from the engine still running. Daniel. He was there. Watching. Windows down. Not hiding. Not smug. Just present. Her breath hitched. She stepped off the porch, papers still in her hand, and began walking. Then faster. Half run, half stumbled down the sloped gravel, her shoes catching in the cracks of the driveway. Daniel, she called out, voice cracking. He didn't move. Daniel, please. Can we just talk? Still motionless. Her heels crunched against the gravel as she reached the edge of the street. She was 10 feet from the truck when he finally looked at her. His face wasn't angry. It was still. Tired. Sure. But not bitter. Just resolved. She took a step closer. Please, she whispered, voice barely audible now. I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know what I was breaking. You didn't even tell me. He blinked slowly, then reached for something. The power window switch. The window slid up. Smooth. Effortless. Sealing her out. He didn't say a word. Didn't shake his head. Didn't mouth sorry. Didn't nod goodbye. He just put the truck into drive. And rolled away. No screeching tires. No dramatic pause. Just quiet motion. She stood there in the middle of the road, holding a foreclosure notice in one hand, her phone in the other, screen black, still no response. The wind picked up slightly. Pages fluttered behind her. And Monica Costello-Jacobs, once the woman who laughed in the face of silence, who mocked the man who held everything together with patience and paperwork, was now just another person left standing on the shoulder of a life that no longer wanted her. He didn't scream. He didn't destroy. He simply removed himself and took the foundation with him.